Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June 2025 Water Conditions Monitoring Committee meeting. My name is Emily Adrid, and I'm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Today, we will have Russ from the Colorado Climate Center and Brian from NRCS provide updates for us today, and then we will get into the local water provider, water manager, municipality updates following their presentations. So thank you for everybody who's already started putting their name and affiliation in the chat. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and do that. And I will pass it off to Russ.
Okay. All right. Get it in the right mode here. Okay. I'm on a slightly different setup at home this morning. So, what are
We're
you seeing?
we're seeing the presenter view.
Yeah, let me see if I can fix that. Nope. No, it says it. All right. Okay, how about now?
Yep, that's great.
Okay, good deal. All right. Good laser pointer. Cool. Okay. And you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Good, good. All right. Well, we'll get started then with our state climate update for this month. As usual, we'll start by looking back at the water year through the end of May, and then take a look at where things have been here in June thus far. This is a great picture from the other night here in Fort Collins from our colleague Henry Regis. Uh, Rainbow, Mamatus, an irrigation ditch. We've got it all there as it comes to water. Okay, so these are the numbers that go through the end of May um, from NOAA's data set. And so the map here shows the ranking out of 130 years in terms of temperature over this period. So for the water year from October through May, so the first 8 months of the water year, and then each individual month and where it stood in terms of temperature is on the right. So the water year through the end of May, generally warm across the state, tied for the 10th warmest start to the water year. The warmth, I guess, especially along the western slope, where it's kind of been a top 10 start to the water year just about everywhere. Um, Also warm on the eastern plains, the mountain areas closer to average over that time period. And we look at the breakdown of the months here. Again, remembering back to last fall, October, and then December were extremely warm. March was also very warm. I'll show May by itself in a minute, but it was actually right kind of near average across most of the state. And then here is the same thing, but for precipitation now for the first 8 months of the water year. And what you can see is a lot of the state actually close to average or kind of in the middle of the historical distribution in terms of precipitation, with the exceptions being Western Colorado, where there are some spots that are top 10 dry for the first 8 months of the water year, and most of the western slope has been below average precipitation. And then southeastern Colorado, southern and southeastern Colorado has been wetter than average, going back to that big storm in November. And they had a pretty big storm in May that I'll show as well. So again, kind of the breakdown. April was quite dry in terms of the spring, but March and May, at least again when you average over the whole state, closer to average. Okay, so here is May on its own for temperature, and not too remarkable. Statewide, 59th warmest, 73rd coldest. Um, Most of the state in the midst of that, kind of near the middle of that historical distribution. Again, the exceptions being far western Colorado, which had a quite warm May, and then southern and southeastern Colorado that was a little cooler than average, but otherwise not too far from the long-term average for May. And here's precipitation. This is percent of average precipitation for May, just to highlight where the storms happened and where they didn't in the month of May. So there was a big, really nice storm early in May in southeastern Colorado, that brought a lot of areas well above average for the month. It had been, so going back to that big storm in November, it had been really dry through the winter and the early spring through most of southern and southeastern Colorado. That storm in early May, was 2-3 inches of rain. A lot of places made up those winter deficits pretty quickly. The place that was quite dry in May was northwestern Colorado. Spring is generally the wettest time of year in northwestern Colorado, especially at the lower elevations. And they didn't have a real great spring up there. Northeastern Colorado also was rather dry for May, but most of those deficits have been made up thus far in June, as I'll show in a minute. And then here's similar, but for the spring, the climatological spring season, March, April, May, was a warm spring across the state, especially again on the western slope and also in eastern Colorado. Top 10 warm spring. Largely that was driven by how warm March was. April was also warmer than average, and then May pretty close to average as we saw. But then, so on the whole, the spring season was warmer than average, 16th warmest when averaged across the state. And here's the spring season for precipitation in terms of the ranking. Again, western Colorado, quite dry, especially northwestern Colorado. Pockets of the northeastern plains were dry for the spring season, but most of the rest of the state in the near average range. So yeah, we kind of see this theme of northwestern Colorado having missed out on a lot of the precipitation that they would normally expect to get in the spring season, and we'll see that reflected on the drought maps as we come to those a little bit later. Okay, just kind of summarize things in terms of these quadrant charts then that we show. Again, as a reminder for these, this is for the month of May. So the horizontal axis here is precipitation. The vertical axis is temperature. So the upper left is where you don't want to be. That's the warm and dry quadrant where drought lives. Upper right is warm and wet. Lower right is cool and wet. Lower left, cool and dry. So for the month of May, again, and this is averaged over the whole state, it's kind of right in the middle, right near average for both temperature and precipitation. As always, averaging across the whole state of Colorado with how diverse it is always has caveats associated with it. But when we do that calculation, it's kind of right in the historical average for both there, for months of May historically. Here's the same thing now for the climatological spring, March, April, May. Now we see this year creeping up into the drought quadrant, right? As we saw, especially western Colorado was warm and dry, and that tilts things toward being in that warm and dry quadrant for those 3 months. And then here's for the water year, first 8 months of the water year, and also in the warm and dry quadrant, but nowhere near some of the historic drought years that are up there. 2000, 1934, 2018, 2002, 2012 were not nearly as bad as those, but certainly dealing with drought across the state as we'll look at. And also you can compare to last year. So 2024 is this one here. Temperature very similar for the first 8 months of the water year, and just a little bit drier than it was last water year for October through May period. All right, so wanted to look back at the snow season. Obviously, Brian will get into the snowfall and the snowpack summary for the mountains at the SNOTEL stations, but wanted to take a look also at the lower elevation snowfall, since I think it's safe to say we're done with that for the season at this point. So what this shows is the percent of the 30-year average snowfall for this season, so basically going from last summer through now, at stations around the state. So if you see here, the purples are more snowfall than average. The yellows and browns are less snowfall than average. And again, there's a few mountain stations in here, but these is mostly lower elevation. So you can kind of look around the state. The Northern Front Range was less snowy than usual. Here in Fort Collins, we were only about half of our average snowfall here. You look down in parts of southeastern Colorado. So these purple dots here are really almost entirely from that huge November storm, right? A lot of places got 30 plus inches of snow in that one storm, and their average is less than that for the whole season. So those, areas from Colorado Springs, Pueblo, and down into the Arkansas Valley are way above average. San Luis Valley, a little bit more snow than usual. Grand Junction stands out here. They actually had their least snowy season on record. Only 2.8 inches of snow recorded at Grand Junction this season, lowest on record, and it was a very dry winter season. Really fall through the spring there. And then one other interesting one that I thought I'd point out is this one here is Holly. And they have only about 25% of their normal snowfall for the season, but 175% of their November through March precipitation. So again, the big November storm was mostly a rainstorm as you got a little bit lower in elevation. So they got a lot of rain, but not very much snow in that one. So it was a very wet winter, or wet fall into spring, but not very much snow. So we were poking around with these in the office a couple of weeks ago, plotting. So this is like the quadrant chart I just showed, but it's actually precipitation versus snowfall instead of temperature versus precipitation. So the x-axis here is the precipitation from November through March. The y-axis is snowfall. Usually they correlate very well, right? Like if you don't get a lot of precipitation in the cool season, you usually aren't getting a lot of snow. Or if you get a lot of snow, you also got a lot of precipitation. The 2025, this is at Holly, 2025 is way down here in the lower right. So a lot of precipitation, not very much snow. There's only one other year that is similar, which was 2000 down there, where similarly Holly got, over 4 inches of precipitation, but only a few inches of snow. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit there in southeastern Colorado with a rather unusual way that the snow season played out there. Okay, now moving into June, from like the 2nd through the 6th of June or so, the week before last, there was a quite unusual rainstorm in southwestern Colorado for the time of year. So this is typically when, late May through June tends to be quite dry in southwestern Colorado, waiting for the monsoon, snow season's over, waiting for the monsoon to start. But there was a strong low pressure system coming in from the west, kind of unusually strong, I guess, for this time of year, and then moisture coming up from the Gulf of California into the southwestern U.S. From the remnants of Tropical Storm Alvin, and the combination of those two came together and produced quite a bit of rain in southwestern Colorado. So here, like this cyan color is 1.5 inches of rain over these 5 days. So or 4 days. So it's kind of notable in some spots there in the San Juans with over 2 inches of mostly rain during this event. And this is a large, much above average for June in this area, especially as you get down to Arizona and New Mexico. So this is the percent of the total June average that fell just during those few days. Much of northern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico had 3 times their typical June precipitation just from this one storm. In southwestern Colorado, it was double the average for June in a lot of places. So again, keep in mind the average for June is less than 1 inch everywhere, less than 1/2 inch a lot of places. So getting 1.5 inches or 2 inches is a pretty big deal. Not that much water in the grand scheme of things, but certainly welcomed after otherwise a fairly dry winter through spring. So here's June statewide precipitation. through Monday morning. You can see most of the Eastern Plains, as is typical for June, have been getting thunderstorm activity and generally reasonably wet. It's spotty as it usually is in the warm season, but you can see a lot of 2 and 3 inches amounts on the Eastern Plains, though also some spots with less. Southwestern Colorado, again, you see the effects of that storm earlier in the month. So widespread 1.5 plus in the San Juans and surrounding areas. So that was quite welcome and led to some improvements in the drought monitor last week that I'll show in a bit. The place that's been dry is Northwestern Colorado. They missed out on that storm early in June and haven't had much since. Here's the same map as percent of average for the month to date, or month through yesterday. Again, most of southwestern Colorado, more than double the average to date. A lot of the Eastern Plains above average, but some pockets that are dry. And then again, northwestern Colorado and extending into Wyoming and Utah has seen very little precipitation so far in June. It's continuing to dry out in those spots. And then here's temperature through the 15th, I guess. I thought it was the 16th, but it's the 15th. Departure from normal for June up to this point. And you can see Eastern Colorado on the coolish side, a little bit cooler than average most places, especially the places where it's been rainy. Western Colorado warmer than average for the first half of June. And again, especially up into Northwest Colorado, where it's been both, they haven't had the precipitation and the clouds, and thus it's been quite a bit warmer than average. And all right, as there was a little bit of chatter as the meeting was started, had to throw this in because this is rather unusual, extremely unusual, along the Northern Front Range early this morning to have severe weather with very large hail from roughly 2 to 4 a.m. So this radar loop from, this goes from about 2:30 to 3:30 a.m. And you can see this is just not, this is what you tend to see in the afternoon. So you just don't see big storms like this blow up at 3 in the morning along the Front Range, but we did last night. So yeah, reports of big hail. This is a CoCoRaHS observer in Wellington. This is how you should collect and measure hail when it's safe. Take a nice picture with the ruler. CoCoRaHS now has photo upload, so you can upload your hail photos if you happen to, hopefully you don't see hail this big, but so that's like tennis ball size there in Wellington. Similar reports around Milliken up to baseball size with car windshields getting bashed in and so forth. And this, for the time of day, this is extremely unusual. So this is the time distribution of 2-inch plus hail in Colorado going back to 1955. When we get big hail, it tends to be in the afternoon and evening, even a little bit into the overnight, almost never in the early morning hours. So there had only, before today, there's only seven reports in the records of 2-inch plus hail between 2 and 5 a.m. Most recent one was around Colorado Springs back in 2018, but extremely unusual there. And I'm sorry if any of you happen to take the brunt of that, getting awakened in the middle of the night to tennis balls. That's never any fun. Okay, now we'll take a look at drought conditions, where things stand with the drought monitor and so forth. So here's the national drought monitor picture from last week. You can see the southwestern U.S. remains in very bad drought conditions, and then some of the Great Plains and Midwest and up into the Northwest and also Florida, I guess, this continues to be in pretty bad drought there. And if we zoom in, here's the Colorado picture. So again, most of southeastern Colorado, really all of southeastern Colorado, drought-free. Most of western Colorado in some category of drought. We've continue to have these pockets of D3 or extreme drought, like to the south of the Colorado River, and a pocket down in southern Colorado. And yes, most of western Colorado in D1 or D2. So almost half the state in drought conditions, 46% or so in D1 or worse as of last week's map. Here's the change map over the last 4 weeks. So what we see again is improvements in southeast Colorado, where they've had pretty good rain. A mix in northeast Colorado, some improvements where we've had good rain in the northern Front Range, and some degradations in places that missed out. Improvements in southwestern Colorado of one category from the storm a couple of weeks ago, and then worsening conditions in most of the other western Colorado areas, those that did not benefit, especially from those from that storm in early June, and that otherwise had poor snowpack and warm and dry spring. And this goes back to the last 3 months, and that I think really shows that in western Colorado, where a lot of areas, as we were in, so this goes back to March 11th, we were in February and the snowpack wasn't looking great, but not terrible in a lot of mountain areas. And then there wasn't a lot of snow after that. And then it got warm and we started melting out early. And I'm sure Brian will show a lot of that later, but you can see the drought monitor has worsened 2 to 3 categories in a lot of western Colorado over the last 3 months. Here's a look at soil moisture. So this kind of, I guess, paints a somewhat similar picture. You can see that, so this is shallower soil moisture on the left, and then the deeper soil moisture on the right. Again, that storm in early June really helped to get some moisture back in the soils in southwestern Colorado. So you can see those are in, above average generally for the shallower soil moisture, maybe closer to average for the deeper soil moisture. But again, northwest Colorado stands out as having poor soil moisture for this time of year. Eastern Colorado generally in that near average to above average range, again, because of the pretty frequent storm activity lately. But then this is this terrestrial water storage product that we've been starting to take a closer look at. This also incorporates the groundwater situation. So it's the combination of groundwater, soil moisture, and snowpack. And this is again the percentiles. So where you see the red there, it's where the combination of these three is very low. So we saw that soil moisture was not too bad in a lot of areas, but the lower elevations wouldn't have snowpack at this time of year generally. So it's probably the groundwater deficits that are driving a lot of this and make the conditions look worse than maybe the soil moisture alone shows there. Okay, now we'll take.
Well, Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
Oh, no worries.
On the groundwater, and yeah, this is a new product. I'm still trying to remember what's all in here. When you talk about groundwater, what kind of depth are we talking? Are we talking the normal aquifers? Are we talking alluvial? What?
I think that's right. I'll have to dive into that again a little bit to see what depth that get because like in this model output there's different layers, but then when they make this terrestrial water storage, they just add them up, because I don't remember what depth of soil moisture is used in this one also.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking with groundwater for most of the Denver Basin aquifers, I mean, we're talking 500 to 1,000 feet deep. So what does it really matter,
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay. And also don't pay any attention to the urban areas on these maps. There's some issue in this model where it's not representing the urban areas properly. Okay. So like you can see Denver basically the conditions in the urban areas never change in this model. So it just kind of always looks at some, over Denver, don't pay attention to that. But yeah, exactly. I think I'll look into that. So then it's a good question, because we should have that information on hand.
And then they have metro areas, they ignore the concrete and the irrigated grass.
Yep.
Makes sense. Okay. Thank you, Russ.
Yep. Well, and they don't it's supposed to be accounted for, the trees and irrigation in the urban areas, but it's not getting handled right for some reason that we always see, we're not sure what's going on with that either. So
too complex to model.
Well, I don't think it's that. I think there might just be a bug in the code or
Oh,
something
okay. All right.
but anyway, but yeah, I'll get back to you on that because that's a good question.
Thank you.
Yep. Cool. Okay, so now we will look forward at the outlook, see where maybe things are headed. So this is for the next 7 days precipitation. And a lot of this is really today, the precipitation you see in northeastern Colorado. So pretty high storm chances. There's already been storms this early this morning, as we talked about, and a lot of moisture in the air. So strong potential for storms today, and then it's going to dry out after today. So we see that pocket in northeast Colorado with some heavier amounts, and then western Colorado dry. Again, this is very typical for mid-June. We don't expect it. We don't expect to get rain in western Colorado at this time of the month. That comes later in the summer when the monsoon kicks in, and you can kind of see that in this map, right? Like zero precipitation is maybe a tenth of an inch below average at most in western Colorado. But you can see that, wherever it rains a bunch in northeast Colorado today, it'll be above average for these 7 days, and then dry elsewhere. And if we look here, this shows the individual days. So the top two maps are the same ones we just looked at, and now the individual days. So again, good chances for thunderstorms today. Also, more chances for hail later. So keep that in mind. But then drying out. So Wednesday through Saturday, completely dry across the region. Maybe start to get some rain chances back in by the end of the weekend into next week. And maybe more notably is it's going to be very hot at the end of this week into the weekend. So this is at Akron as one example. This is the ensemble of weather prediction models for temperature there. The average conditions are the gray lines there. So the average at Akron in mid-June is in the mid-80s for the highs. They'll probably be getting to 100 Friday and Saturday, or at least close to 100 both of those days. Also hot on Thursday. And way above average low temperatures. I wouldn't take the lows literally here. It'll probably drop below 70, but still well above average low temperatures. But then into early to mid next week, quite a bit cooler, and then maybe back closer to average in the week or so beyond that. And yeah, this map shows the places that are forecast to have record highs on. This one is for Friday. There's a few on the map on Saturday as well. So the record high on Friday at Denver is 99, and the forecast is 99. I guess this also includes some that are close to average or close to record. So the record at Pueblo is 103 on Friday. The forecast is 102. So very hot for a few days, especially Friday and Saturday. This looks out then to the following week. So this is the last week of June. Again, looks closer to average for both temperature and precipitation for that last week of June. Big heat wave coming to the East Coast during that period. So you'll probably be hearing about that in the national news quite a bit. And then this looks out to the week 3 and 4 period. So this is basically the first 2 weeks of July or so, which is showing much hotter than average conditions across the Western US. But also what catches my eye here is this above average early July in Arizona and New Mexico, which means that the monsoon is predicted to get started in that time frame. So we'll keep our eye out for that. That's still a ways out, but that is, that's the kind of thing we'll all be trying to keep an eye out for. And then this tries to sum together the next 15 days in terms of the probability of being below average for precipitation on the left, near average in the middle, above average on the right. Most of the state looking below average for the next 15 days, or at least a high probability of being below average in Western Colorado. Most likely scenario is probably below average over the next 15 days, but not as confident on the Eastern Plains. And again, what happens this afternoon may drive this in a lot of places for some spots getting some heavier rain. Okay, looking farther out then, so La Nina is over. That is, I think, was declared over maybe a month or two ago. And we're now in neutral, ENSO neutral conditions. And that is expected to continue at least through the summer and maybe through the fall and winter, although as it says, the confidence is lower. So 82% chance of maintaining ENSO neutral through the summer, and then lower confidence that it stays in place into next winter. What does show up is if it's not ENSO neutral next winter, it'll probably be La Nina again, which is not the greatest news, but that's wouldn't get too concerned about that at this point, because you can see in the models on the right, some are showing you can find a model that shows just about anything out through next winter. So what this does is it just does kind of take away one of our sources of predictability through the summer and fall. So that, but generally good news that we don't have La Nina around, since that tends to be dry in the summer and fall. And I'll show these briefly, but these are a little bit out of date now. This is last month's outlooks. The new ones come out on Thursday this week, so take a look for that. But this is the June, July, August outlook, which shows a tilt towards warmer than average conditions across the Western US. I think this is probably still a pretty reasonable outlook, even though we're halfway through June at this point. And then pretty uncertain in terms of precipitation. Expectation for drier than average conditions up in the northern tier of states, and then maybe an above average monsoon down in Arizona, and Colorado kind of in the middle. So we'll see what the new outlooks look like when they come out on Thursday for the rest of the summer. Okay, so some takeaways. Water year up to this point has been on the warm and dry side, especially for Western Colorado. Although that storm in June helped a little bit. Southeastern plains have been wetter than average for the water year from the big storms in November and May. The month of May was very average when you look across the state as a whole. In June so far, we had an unusual rainstorm in Southwest Colorado, which at least slowed down the worsening of drought that was happening there. And there's been pretty active thunderstorms with rainfall in Eastern Colorado. I think for drought concerns, Northwestern Colorado is the part of the state to be most concerned about at the moment. The last few months have been quite dry. It's been hot this month thus far with very little precipitation. It looks like that's going to continue at least for a while. And I'm sure Brian will talk plenty about stream flows, but they're below average across all of Western Colorado. Heat wave this weekend, chances for record highs on Friday and Saturday. And we're going to dry out as we usually do at the end of June, and wait and hope for the monsoon, the North American monsoon, to kick in. And then looking out further, again, La Nina is gone, which makes the precipitation outlook a little less certain even than usual. But at least the potential is there for the monsoon to be active in the Southwest, and we'll wait and see on that. So that is all I have, and happy to take questions if there are any, if there's time. And here's our info here, and otherwise I'll kick it over to Brian.
Awesome. Thank you, Russ. Any questions for him?
I don't know if there was anything in the chat. I couldn't see that.
No, nothing in the chat.
Okay.
I'll say it's kind of nice to hear that May was just very, very average on both temperature and precipitation. Nothing too hot or too dry. So, all right, well.
Yep, for as much as we talk about averages, it's actually kind of rare to really see the average.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Well, if anybody has any lingering questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you again, Russ, and I will pass it over to Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and good morning, everybody. Great presentation as always. Russ, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
All right, great. Let me attempt to share my screen and then get the presentation going. All right, so I think I want to go with uh, this screen, sorry. No, that doesn't seem to want to work. Well, I may have to switch it up, so let me try this. Sorry for the delay here. All right. Are you
Cool.
seeing the main presentation?
No. Oh, yes. Yes. Now we are.
Okay. Is there a little delay?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, internet's not the best here, so please forgive that. Hopefully we don't have any issues there. And then it gets pretty warm here in the office. So I have a fan going. Has the fan been causing any audio problems?
No, I can't hear it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, going to get started here. Yeah, we'll start off with a recap of snowpack, what we saw for snowpack this season. Won't go deep into depth here, but we are pretty much through the snow season at this point. There's just a few sites left with snow, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. So recapping this year's snowpack, you can see here that we're pretty much entirely melted out with snowpack at our SNOTEL sites. As you'll see from the stream flow, the snow to flow graphs that I show here at the end, in just about all basins at most stream gauges, we are on the recession side of the hydrograph, which means snowpack is mostly melted out. Yeah, if you look out your window or you get up into the mountains, you can see that above tree line, there's still some snow in the couloirs and other areas. It's up there, but that's not really able to drive the snowpack, or excuse me, drive the hydrograph anymore. That's why we're on the recession side. So looking at a few dates over the course of this year, at one point snowpack was 93% of median on May 24th, but since then the snowpack has just declined a bit faster than normal. And then I don't even want to highlight where the snowpack is right now with so few sites with snowpack anymore. Yeah, there's a value here, but it really is not of importance. One thing to point out, though, is that as you know, anybody who's been following snowpack this year knows the snowpack peaked out near normal, but was melting out quite quickly. Once snowpack starts to get into a good melt cycle, once we have those warm temperatures, it's really difficult to slow down that snowpack melt. As a matter of fact, I hope you can see my pointer. You can see that across the state, in general, we did wind up hitting a much faster than normal snowpack melt. And to compare, you would look at kind of the median line here. It's not super steep here, but here we've got a relatively steep snowpack meltout. And then we had a storm that came in, improved snowpack across a few basins. But as soon as temperatures get right back to normal, you can see that melt rate really gets back to being pretty fast, and the melt rate being the slope of the line there. So once snowpack gets to melting, it's really hard to slow it down. And actually, let me go back and point out one other thing. Mathematically, the way it works and the way the graph kind of represents here is towards the end of the melt season, there's a tail, as we call it, as this kind of smooths out and the melt rate kind of slows down. And I say mathematically because the melt rates continue at the sites, but it's the averages and the numbers that actually wind up making this appear as though the melt rates are slower. They really aren't. It's just the lack of sites and the data editing. Sometimes we're not able to get to the data editing quite so quick. And that's really not the driver, but that's why we see these lower melt rates here. They really are not lower. It's just the way the math works out with less sites with snow. Okay, as I mentioned before, there's only a few sites left with snow on them. Forgive me, I wrote today on here. I updated this presentation yesterday. So that's what we've got here. There's really only 2 sites in Colorado that have snow on them anymore, Tower and Fool Creek. I think they just have, Tower has, I think, about 5 inches of snow water equivalent on it, maybe a little bit more than that, 7. And Fool Creek has just a few. And if I recall correctly, Fremont probably melted out yesterday. It had 1 inch of water left on it. And then there's 2 sites in Wyoming that still have snow on them, but they are melting relatively rapidly. All right, so looking back at the snowpack, when about we saw the peak snowpack, which was about April 7th for the entire state. Again, remember that snowpack can peak at different times for different portions of the state. And this year was, for the most part, no different, although it was a little bit more consistent this year. Southern half of the state melted out, or excuse me, peaked about that same time. But the northern half of the state, some sites peaked a little bit later. I think I have that in the next slide. Nonetheless, snowpack peaked at 89% of median compared to the median line, as from the graph 2 slides ago. It's that actual green line. And then if you remember from that slide 2 ago, there is a green X above that green line. That is the snowpack peak. Median, the math is a little bit different on those 2. The behaviors are a little bit different, but that's the way it works out. And then here's where each site peaked out this year in terms of snow water equivalent on average, compared to that X that's at the top of the snowpack graph. Each site, or excuse me, the cumulative of the sites peaked out at 81% of median 1 day earlier than normal. So a bit of a lackluster snowpack and peak. Would have liked to have seen better conditions, and that really is going to wind up lending itself to a lot of the information and stream flow forecasts that we're going to see here going forward. Okay, moving on into statewide precipitation. As of yesterday morning, precipitation statewide year to date is 87% of median. This actually happens to be the exact same number we saw during last month's presentation here at the Water and Climate Monitoring. That presentation was on 5/16. So there, of course, were some changes over the course of the month since last presentation, but really we began and ended at the same point, 87% of median. Looking at it spatially, using the map, again, statewide precipitation, 87% of median, slightly better in the eastern half of the state, 93, 94% of median in the South Platte and Arkansas River basins. But then once we go westward, as Russ was pointing out earlier, in the mountains, precipitation just hasn't been quite as good, but relatively consistent between 82 and 86% of median. And then breaking it down into the kind of minor basins, as I like to call them, across the state, as opposed to the 7 major basins, we are seeing that the higher elevations are tending to have slightly better precipitation, at least in the central and northern portions of the state. Once you get a little bit lower elevation or kind of downstream, year-to-date precipitation for the mountains is not that great. However, I think as I look at this map, it seems that year-to-date precipitation is relatively consistent. I mean, yeah, we've got some 90s and 100% of normal, and then some basins that are 70. But at least, statewide year-to-date, we're not seeing any real big discrepancies. The situation is kind of the same. Higher elevations doing a little bit better, lower elevations not quite so much. That statement is not quite as true in the San Juans, but as Russ was saying, we've received some better precipitation recently, so things are kind of helping out. But in the northern and central half of the state, things are a little bit more consistent. Now, as we get into the northwest corner of the state, things do dive off a good bit as we break it down for the last month and a half of precipitation. So here's another way we like using these stack graphs to kind of track how precipitation has transpired over the course of the water year. This is water year 2025, and we work up from the bottom, so October, November, December, so on and so forth. And then here is the median stack graph, and you can see here that May was 2.5 inches of precipitation. Sorry, I don't have that annotated with the actual number there, but I will tell you it is 2.5. And then looking at the median for May was 2.4. So that's 104% of median accumulation for the month of May. And here is how it kind of panned out for the mountains on the map. East facing, as Russ showed, considerably better precipitation accumulation through May. And then the San Juans were not quite as great for the mountains. Again, like Russ was saying, when your expectations that when the normal amount of precipitation is relatively low, a big storm will wind up helping out. Now, I know Russ was talking about June, but May still wound up working out pretty well, but it is those central, western, and northwestern basins that did not fare so well through May here. I'll get into June here in a little bit. Okay, so since last month's I always do that. Since last month's presentation, precipitation looked a little bit better than it did in May. Southern half of the state benefited a bit better than the whole state. Again, the Yampa White Basin as well as the North Platte didn't fare quite so well, but the South Platte and the Colorado River headwaters did relatively well. At least closer to normal than the Yampa White and North Platte, but it's the southern half of the state that really benefited since last presentation. Now, looking at June, precipitation to date as of yesterday morning, just like Russ was saying, really good. That early June storm really helped out the southern half of the state where it's needed, but that northwestern portion of the state and then North Platte, not so much. Okay. What was the kind of trend? Oh, excuse me. I thought I would dive into the two basins in the state that did the worst and the best. The Arkansas, which is currently at 94% of median, really benefited from those storms in early May, and then again did see benefits in early June, but has dried out since. That is relatively normal to see that kind of stints of storms and then dry periods this time of year. And then looking at the Dolores Animas, or San Miguel, Dolores Animas, San Juan, where precipitation is 82% of median, things have remained relatively dry, but did see a decent boost. In early June, unfortunately, we need a considerable larger accumulations to really get back to median, at least down there in the San Miguel, Dolores Animas, San Juan basins. Okay, quickly looking at soil moisture, I always caution people in using this data. It does seem to be correlating with what Russ is presenting. I'd also like to point out that our data is what's in the mountains, so it's going to be a little bit different than some of those distributed products, which are great that Russ is showing. But our sensors are still building up a historical record to compare to, as well as we do not have soil moisture sensors at all of our sites. But I think it does tend to kind of indicate what we are seeing this time of year, with a few exceptions. So looking here at the 8-inch soil moisture sensor as of yesterday morning, I think the better conditions that we're seeing in the Arkansas and some of the information that we're seeing in the Rio Grande from the recent precipitation is indicating decent soil moisture conditions. I'm not quite sure what's going on here in the South Platte. We are seeing some consistent conditions. I would not really expect to see this from the 8-inch sensor over some of the after some of the storms that we received in early June, but so I'm taking this with a bit of a grain of salt. I would like to dig into this deeper. If I have time, I will try to do it. But maybe that is what's going on. We'll go into the soil moisture sensor. We'll go into the 20-inch sensor here in a little bit and kind of show what that's indicating. But I mean, we are on the backside of winter here, so I would expect at least the 20-inch sensor to be showing better conditions. 8-inch sensor, not so much. But again, we only have limited sensors. So here, digging into the 20-inch sensor, this makes sense what we're seeing in the Yampa and White Basins, drier conditions. Even after melt, it doesn't surprise me that we'd have 85% of normal soil moisture up there. The Arkansas has done relatively well this year, so I think these conditions are especially with the, what we've seen in the last 2 months, month and a half. It doesn't surprise me. But in general, what our sensors are showing for soil moisture, particularly at that 20 inch, is that we're doing relatively well. Gunnison, not so great. I would like to dig into that a little bit more, but I think otherwise what we're seeing is indicative of what we have for soil moisture, at least in the mountains. Okay, moving on into reservoirs quickly. This is last month's slide. So last month we were 92% of median reservoir storage statewide. Better in the southern half of the state, near normal in the northern half, but the San Miguel de los Animas San Juan kind of lagging behind. Transition to this month, the low conditions persist in the San Miguel de los Animas San Juan, and we see a bit of a decline across the state. We went from 92 last month to 89 this month. I think it is pretty normal to see an overall decline at this time of year. I'll get it. There's a graphical representation next slide, so you'll see that. But overall, reservoir conditions are relatively stable, just a slight decline since last month. And then looking at the time series going back about 30 years, the orange line is the state of Colorado, where we did see a decline of 3% from last month to this month, but still doing relatively well compared to 2018, 2021, and 2022. But would like to see some additional precipitation to hopefully bring up those reservoir numbers. Okay, moving on into stream flow forecast, I should say, for the next 3 slides. This slide is from the March 1st stream flow forecast, where snowpack wasn't fully accumulated. We were a bit closer to normal. We didn't receive some of those dry conditions yet, and stream flow forecasts were looking a bit better, at least in the northern and eastern mountains. Transition to the May 1 forecast, where things declined semi-significantly statewide. And then here this last month, so the June 1 forecasts were published, I think, on about June 7th or 8th. These are the results of those forecasts, or the outputs from those forecasts. You can see that in the Yampa White basins, forecasts were near about half of normal. Same goes for the San Miguel de los Animas San Juan basins, where they're actually less than half. We're looking at 44% for the average across the basin, but better in the South Platte and the Arkansas and headwaters of the Colorado, and decreasingly worse in the North Platte, Gunnison, and Upper Rio Grande basins, unfortunately. So the June 1 forecast is our last forecast of the year. So we won't be putting out forecast again until January 1, 2026. So this is what we have to go with. And so from here on out, what we would suggest people look at is the forecasts for June 1, as well as where stream flow conditions currently are. If you happen to look at them, in the future, make sure you're looking at the most recent stream flow conditions to get an idea of, just kind of future guidance to that point. Just thought I would show our our forecast distributions for a few of the, targeted basins in the state. I picked out the San Miguel de los Animas San Juan because it's been particularly dry there. I picked out the South Platte because that's one of the better kind of groupings of stream flow forecast in the state, but nonetheless, they're still pretty much all below normal. I did decide to choose the June through July forecast period for the 4 main basins that I'm going to show here, just for consistency's sake. There are other forecasts that we have out there, but they're not all as consistent as that June-July forecast. Pretty much all scenarios show below to well below normal stream flow runoff for all of the stream gauges we forecast in the San Miguel de los Animas San Juan. This gray line here is average runoff, and you can see that even the highest projections do not get near normal. In the San Miguel de los Animas San Juan basin, the South Platte basin, there are a few more optimistic, or should we get above normal precipitation in the next few months, this is what would drive those stream flow forecasts to get up to near normal as I hover over the gray line, which is 100% of normal runoff. But in most scenarios, which is the green bolded values that I'm kind of hovering over here, most of those outcomes indicate below normal runoff. And it's worth pointing out that if your crystal ball tells you that precipitation is going to be below normal for the next few months, you would probably want to hedge your bets to look at these forecast values that are lower on the distribution for whatever stream flow point you're interested in. And then real quick, just looking at the Arkansas, one of the better basins in the state, at least for precipitation and snowpack, and then the Yampa White and Little Snake, what those June 1 forecast indicated. Okay, and then finally, looking at the actual stream flows compared to the snowpack that we saw. In each of these graphs, as I have done over the past few months, I'll put in last year and then a year that's similar to this year to kind of hopefully help anticipate what the runoff will be. In this particular plot, the Rio Grande near Del Norte, I selected 2013. And you can actually see that, those peaks from 2013, the purple line here, match relatively closely to the black line. The hydrograph for this gauge here are relatively close. We did see a slightly later runoff, perhaps because of some of the precipitation that we received. Or excuse me, I shouldn't say a later runoff, I should say peak. But it's pretty clear at this point that the Rio Grande is declining based on the snowmelt driven factors on the Rio Grande here. And then the green line is normal stream flows. And then this the green dotted line, I should say, is normal stream flows, and the green line here is the normal snowpack. You can see that we melted off much earlier than normal, and you can see that the recession of the normal stream flow here in the black line is a good bit earlier, a few weeks earlier than normal. And that, of course, unfortunately, is going to be a recurring theme through all of these stream gauges. This one is a bit closer to normal. Colorado River near Dotsero. You can see our peak snowpack was relatively close to normal, but it is much lower runoff, or much lower stream flows than what we're seeing for the peak. And I think it's pretty certain that the hydrograph will continue to tail off here. At this point, because snow is almost entirely melted out here, it would take a large rainstorm to really drive that hydrograph higher. Gunnison River near Gunnison, snowpack below normal, hydrograph below normal as well. And we are on the recession side there. And then the last two, the San Juan River, again, well below normal snowpack, and then well below normal runoff. And then lastly, the Arkansas River near Salida. Snowpack was relatively near normal peak value, but it was the peak happened earlier and the runoff started earlier, and we're seeing that corresponding runoff here. The hydrograph was, or excuse me, the peak runoff was near about normal height, or I should say normal peak day flow, but you can see that the hydrograph is starting to recede earlier than normal, and in total winds up meaning less volume. I just thought I'd throw this in there real quick. So this does not have to do with stream flow. This is a air temperature observations from one particular site. I decided to pick Loveland Basin because it has one of the best historical records for air temperature observation. This is the entire year that I am showing here, and just showing that where we're at today, or I should say yesterday's value was within normal. Again, I'm putting this up there because this product is now available on our web pages. And is available to anybody. So you're welcome to look at this information. It only displays temperature for individual sites. We're not conglomerating it into basins or anything, or summaries for larger basins or anything. But it does show kind of, where sites have been. And this is the historical occurrences. Forgive the shading. The value up here is clearly the high temperature for the day or this year here, and then the low temperature is actually in warm colors. I don't know if there's any plans to fix that at this point, but and if you notice many of our other graphs, from precipitation to temperature to the stream, or from precipitation to snowpack to stream flows, you can see that we always go with the blue up higher on the graphs, and red. I'd have to ask if they're going to change that, but hopefully that doesn't bother anybody. I'd also like to point out that most of our sites still have some historical data that needs to be corrected, so it won't look quite as clean or as correct as this Loveland site does. So just be cognizant of that if you're using these products, that our data does still need to be cleaned up, and we hope to do that over the next 2 years. Clean up that data, but just know that we've got to go through daily observations for all 170 of our sites, going back however many years, in some cases 40 years. Okay, so in summary, snowpack is mostly melted out. We have, maybe 4 or 5 sites in Wyoming and Colorado that still have snow on them. Most stream gauges are observing receding stream flows as the snowpack is pretty much melted out. There's a lot less snow to drive those hydrographs. Statewide precipitation year to date is at 87% of median. May precipitation statewide was 104, but a little bit drier in the northwest half of the state, wetter in the rest of the state, actually. Accumulation, I was just pointing out that accumulation has kind of differed, which I just mentioned. Statewide reservoir storage is at 89% of median, which is down 3% from last month. So not much of a change, but something to keep an eye on. And then stream flow forecasts from June 1 were the lowest that we've seen all year. And then with the dry conditions that we've seen through much of the year, I would think that things are going to be continue to be relatively dry for those runoff projections. I think what we saw through June in terms of precipitation will help boost stream flows a little bit, but I didn't see much of a bump from some of those early June storms that we saw across much of the state. Usually the hydrograph will kind of tend to show that, but it didn't really seem to show much of a bump. It seemed to maybe sustain some of those receding flows from snowmelt. And that's all that I've got.
Great, thank you, Brian. Would you mind putting the links in the chat to those newer tools that you mentioned?
I don't mind at all. I can certainly do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions for Brian? All right. Hearing none. Thanks again, Brian, for the update. And I think now we can get into the local updates. I'd love to hear from you all about how water supply is looking in your corner of the state. So yeah, feel free to either put your update in the chat or come off mute. Love to hear from you. I can also call on you.
Somebody needs to break the ice, so
Yes,
Islands
thank you,
Ranch.
Swithin.
We are seeing pretty reduced stream flows in the Upper South Platte, where some of our supply comes from. We're in the half to 2/3 of total flow up there, kind of tracking with the D1 conditions. But overall, demands have been fairly normal. Reservoir storage, we're at 78%. I don't have any concerns for Highlands Ranch this irrigation season so far. We'll see what the 100-degree weather does, but luckily it's not supposed to last. So hopefully that got people over their shyness and other people from outlying areas can contribute.
Thanks, Swithin.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Fantastic. Hey, this is Nick Harris with Colorado Springs Utilities. I think utilities is along the same lines as everybody else. We have projected our overall yield at 92% for this year. I think we're kind of in a good spot. A lot of our larger systems are some of those high elevation, high mountain areas that have fared better than some of the other ones. At this time, our overall system storage is 86%. Our 30-year normal is 80, so we're doing pretty well. We're anticipating a pretty strong year. Obviously, stream flows and yields are reduced, but at least down here in El Paso County, we've had quite a bit of rain, which has really reduced our demand over the last few weeks. I think it's very noticeable with the warm days of a few warm days in the last few days. We've started to see some demands pick up, but some of that reduced demand helped hopefully offset some of the reduced yields that we're kind of anticipating. But at least for Colorado Springs Utilities, we anticipate still a pretty good year.
Awesome. Good to hear. Thanks, Nick. All right, I see in the chat an update from City of Loveland. Reservoirs near full. Luckily, stream call has been more junior. Stream flow on Big T appears to be continued to decrease. We also have seen significant demand increases. Okay, so hearing some demand increases as of late. John, thank you for your update in the chat as well. Thornton Storage, 97%. Water year to date production, 5.28% above last year. Clear Creek came way up over the last few weeks and was held.
John, are you all still in drought restrictions? Just out of curiosity.
No, we are not anticipating drought restrictions at this time. Due to our drought plan and drought in our watersheds, we're still in drought watch.
Drought watch. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And is that gonna continue? Just out of curiosity.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand that.
Drought watch. You'll remain in drought watch, you think?
Well, I don't know. The way drought has improved over the last this rainy period, this spring, it's hard to say. But yeah, that is our from our drought plan, and our risk manager person says we need to stick to the plan.
Got it. Well, thanks. Sorry to put you on the spot. It's just you'd given the update.
No worries.
I hadn't heard an update in a while. Since I'm talking, I can give Denver Water's update. Similar to a lot of folks, we're a couple percent below normal in terms of reservoir storage, but certainly not to the point where we're worried about it. Just kind of slightly drier than usual. And our demands were higher for kind of early spring, but this June they've been well below average with all the precipitation we've been getting as well. So similarly, that's been nice to kind of balance off the slightly lower reservoir levels. Not a lot to report for us.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm hearing similar stories across the Front Range. And thank you, Beverly, for providing a West Slope update from the Upper Gunnison. Looks like Upper Gunnison Reservoir storage 78%, stream flows ranging from 43 to 93. It's quite a big range, and very warm temperatures for this time of year. Thanks for that update. Any other West Slope folks on the call? Just looking through the participant list, I don't see anyone who necessarily is from West Slope. So thanks, Beverly, for providing that. Anyone else? Last call. Okay, well, I think that we can conclude today's meeting. Thank you all for attending and providing your report outs. Our next Water Conditions Monitoring Committee will be on July 22nd. So I will hopefully see you all then. Thank you.